King of Podcasts proudly presents The Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts.
Welcome to the Broadcasters Podcast, episode 141. I'm so thankful for all of you to join me here on the program. Quick announcement. I'm happy to go and announce that the Broadcasters Podcast is now available for all of you through the courtesy of Amazon Music. If you have Amazon Music in your library, you know. If you didn't know yet, podcasts are now available there. So by all means, look for all the podcasts of the King of Podcasts Radio Network. There's the Broadcasters Podcast, which you catch every week. Then there's also my wrestling program, Wrestling is Real. And then I have the umbrella program you might have also caught as of courtesy of this program, When I'm Not Podcast. You can find all those at Amazon Music. So go ahead and look for the podcast there, along with all the other places you can find the show, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and so many others. They're all on the top of my mind because, of course, that's King of Podcasts. I should know all these places. I should know where everything's at. And that's what I do. So I haven't had any interviews set up. I've thought about, making the search for it and putting the effort out there to get some more interviews done. Because I remember I did, right at the start of the pandemic, I did, 3 months worth of interviews? I think it was 10 or 12 interviews I did. And I just remember I was all the way good until the end of July. And I just stopped. I was like, okay. I've done a lot of interviews here on the program, but I really do like the format of getting to what I always do right now with my wrestling program. I could just sit down and rant for an hour. I don't have stories where I necessarily do that here on this program because there's just so many stories to point out that are the focus every week. And there is just enough going on out there. There's more than enough going on right now to talk about to where I can get to, being this media watchdog and then just finding a certain narrative, a certain arc of things that are going on that really make a big difference. And, the constant theme of this program that we always talk about here is the digital media disruption. And again, this goes back to 1996, but it's such a more significant thing. Like we've seen a gradual disruption going on for 25 years. Again, 1996, we will be coming up with the 25th anniversary very soon. But what's really interesting is when I look at what's all going on here, this digital media disruption, when the internet really pushed itself out there and social media became the norm, if you only had it for 14 years now? It's amazing how much of a difference it's made. Now, just a quick note. The Telecommunications Act of 1996, its 25th anniversary will be February 8th. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to probably put a show on that day to mark the moment and to go through a lot of what's gone on here. How much has gone and happened that have really just... For good and for bad, look at what's gone on with the whole industry in general, entertainment and media, and how much has been affected. Traditional, corporatized, socially charged, politically driven media and entertainment. Because it wasn't always like that. And even in the corporate sense, it wasn't so bad because corporate used to be really concerned about programming and content. But now it's all about advertising. And it's also certain people that are in power, they have a certain narrative that needs to be controlled. And there's a particular, state of people that are actually doing that. Thus, they always talk about state-controlled media or state-controlled entertainment. And that's what's going on now. And the thing is that there's always going to be a mainstream, but the mainstream needs to be under nobody's direct control. It can be controlled under the guises of many different companies, sure. But when we're seeing music being controlled by 3 major companies, when we're seeing, news being controlled by basically 4 major companies, when we're seeing, radio being run and handled by 2 major companies, and, movies also by just a number of major studios in the same vein, when you're seeing all this corporatization, all the deregulation that happened all the way up to now, this is where we have gotten to. And so if there's a particular narrative that's being brought up by the small amount of groups that are out there, then it's not going to serve the public entirely. And what happened was, instead of serving the public has started to withdraw from traditional mainstream entertainment and media. They're withdrawing. And then what happens is that some of these companies have gotten smart and they were forward thinking that they needed to move themselves into the digital space. So what we've seen in the last couple of years doing this program, we've talked constantly about all the different companies that have made their way into digital. Again, all the network TV outlets, they're all moving there. At this point, look at we 2 years ago, we didn't have Peacock. I don't know if CBS All Access was all set to go, which will become Paramount Plus next year. We didn't have Disney Plus. I mean, we didn't have any of this. And now we do. And Netflix was already a major player, but now they are one of the biggest players, to the fact that a lot of things happened this year. And going back to last year, remember, April 2019 was really a major start, because what happens is in the corporatization, this mainstream model, the one thing that's always been a constant is that, because of the corporatization, the employees want to be protected, thus unions, thus labor unions. And so when these unions are being controlled, how they are going to be controlled, of course, this is a way for the unions to go ahead and placate and make sure that the corporate types will capitulate on a regular basis, whether it's a 10-year deal, 5-year contract, whatever it is. But then it's all in a domino form in Hollywood. We've talked about this extensively. And so what happens is we're at the point where you had already, going back to April 2019, the Writers Guild of America and the Association of Talent Agents, and the longstanding tradition of packaging and bundling, directors, producers, screenwriters, and the like together into a deal. The Michael Ovitz type, CAA type deals, right? Those days are gone. And then what has happened is not only did you have the issue where the Writers Guild stood up, the other labor unions then stood forward because they were waiting for the WGA and ATA to get their deal done. Therefore, the AMPTP could get their deal done. The IATSE could get their deal done. So we already knew there was a lot of issues in terms of pilot season last year in 2019. And now it's compromised even more because the strike across the board has extended. And it's going to go into a second year most likely with all this not resolved because of the fact that we had a stoppage. Not because just of the strike, because we didn't actually have picket lines, but we still had some production going on. But the corporate types, the major studios, struggled. And they were working off of content they already had. Well, they're continuing to do that. And now the mainstream entertainment and media is hemorrhaging. They're hurting right now. We're going to talk about stories that lead up to the story of this, which leads to the title of my program tonight: Digital Media Disruption Dominates in a Crushing Entertainment and Media COVID Crisis. Because COVID, talk about another wrench into the whole mess of Hollywood. This has made it worse. But the digital media disruption has not stopped at all. It has continued to do very well, as we can tell. And you can just see it. I mean, you can't look at TV, network TV, you can't even look at the same anymore right now because they're so caught up in the narrative of making people stay, where the bulk of major cities, people are still more or less locked down. They're still being told, stay home, wait for the vaccine, wear a mask and keep yourself protected. Got that. But they're really pushing to the point where that's just the life that people live, that we're living inside these little bubbles. We never get out, and it's like we're in this dystopian nightmare because the networks have made it feel like that. Now, cable doesn't hurt so much because they have all this other stuff going on, but in cable, you have live sports that has also been affected. But at least sports has done a little bit better job of trying to normalize what they're doing, but network has not. Now, what I have said in certain cases that there are things that have gone on that made it a little bit better. Like network TV, the Emmys came on, it looked bad, and the ratings kept going down again. Regardless of what they talked about. It's just the old model doesn't work. And now when you can't do the old model, you can't put crowds together, the award season is going to be highly affected. Not to mention, what are they going to have to nominate? There's not much to work off of. There might be some movies that got pushed out through festivals that never got into the main widescreen. We never know. What's funny is this year, there's a lot of we don't know any Oscar-nominated movies right now at all that are going to be in the movie theaters at the end of the year. That could be useful to have. That widescreen release, the 4-year consideration time. We don't have any of those movies coming up right now. And they should be starting right now, coming up in October. We're not getting those. What we're getting is a regression. Because the major studios, they're more about making their money. And they know they can't get people to come to watch movies or to go to concerts because of how things have been set. The scare, the panic porn, all that's going on. Whether you believe it or not, it's affected everything. We are more than 6 months into this. And the media entertainment complex have not made their way out of this. They're not trying to normalize yet. Sports has tried to normalize, believe it or not. And they've done a pretty good job of it. I can't say baseball I feel so much about. Basketball's done very well. NFL's done very well. College football's done very well. Soccer's done very well. So, I mean, there's a lot of sports out there back on board, and we're watching it. And aside from a little bit of the social narrative that's been brought on because of current events, okay, otherwise, it's what we watch. Sports is out there. But the Hollywood showbiz kind of thing, it doesn't feel so much anymore. Our Hollywood fix goes to Netflix, goes to Hulu, Peacock, whatever. We go to those other channels. We're not going to ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox, CW at all. We're not. And the ratings are affecting it. All of them. Reality shows don't have the punch anymore. And of course, they've all, been recorded. They only have so much left to put on unless they just rerun. And the thing is, I don't understand why the networks didn't try to rerun shows. I guess they just felt like they couldn't put anything that, if it wasn't new content, nobody's going to watch. But I think they could have gone to a rerun model and work off of that. But they didn't bother to do it. And it's a shame. They made mistakes. But the problem is they probably can't put those shows on because they've committed them to digital streaming. So they can just bring a show back and put it on the air. They can't do it. So there might have been some shows that have started production now. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But there's just not much there. There's not much you can do. It's a major struggle. And nobody has an idea of what to do to fix this. But the effects are here. Let me take you to a story from thedrum.com. Entertainment and media revenues have slumped 6.7% overall in 2020. Now, this is just the overall view. But again, some sectors have been hurt more than others. We know that the movie industry has hurt badly. Even though the movie industry might actually do a better box office take than China, it's still like 80% lower than what they were expected. That's what's going on. So the exhibition houses, they're hurting bad. The award shows, hurting bad. Like, it's all this stuff that's hurting bad that requires a crowd. Concerts, live events. Like, we're seeing all the changes, and we continue to see new things that go on a regular basis that cause the problem. So the Drum reports here. PricewaterhouseCoopers put out their Global Entertainment and Media Outlook report. And in the UK sector, it was a 6.7% decline in growth. So this is the UK, but still, in the US, it's the same kind of idea. But nobody's going to put that out in the US because that's just going to scare companies. Stock prices will go down. Now, the slump is driven by a collapse in the cinema box office, which will be overtaken by subscription video on demand this year. It's unlikely to be a one-off phenomena because SVOD gains are expected to further continue by 2024. The situation is mirrored by smartphone data versus fixed-line broadband, with the former set to consolidate its lead as the go-to for internet access. So broadband, your traditional broadband at home, is becoming much more important because people are not going out with portable devices right now because people are just feeling inclined to stay home. Whether it's because you just want to or because the fear has been brought on, instilled in you, inside of you, where you feel like something's going to happen. Okay. Now, the outlook is brighter because the UK entertainment and media sector is projected to grow by 15 billion euros over the next 5 years. So they expect forecast growth. So it'll be turning around. Over-the-top video has been a natural beneficiary of changed circumstances. Their revenue jumping 18.6% in 2020. Video games reaping the benefits to 9 and 15% respectively in 2020. And video games alone are expected to be worth 6.8 billion euros. That's like over $7 billion. $7 billion by 2024. Cinemas are showing signs of recovery as there's normal life being resumed, so there'll be a rebound of 2019 levels by 2024. But again, we'll see a slow growth in that market. Live music is also adapting innovations such as this year's Wireless Festival, a virtual reality performance by Melody. In this particular talking about, the virtual performance was seen by more than 130,000 people, and there'll be a return of revenues by that point as well. Now, in this story, they say that the pandemic will accelerate existing digital disruption trends, stating that, quote, industries that are forecast to claw back their lost revenue are ones being driven or have embraced technology as a way to connect with consumers. And that's the point I wanted to point. There you go. So we've seen that going on. We see casinos now trying to go online gaming. We see how all the acceleration of all these different over-the-top networks are going on, all the streaming media. That's becoming much more prominent now. More the focus. So we are at the point where now most of the networks are going to be secondarily looking at their own content on their networks. Like they have the properties physically, but you know, the worth of them right now to try to make them still a place to watch first run programming, people are not really into that anymore. And especially if they don't have live sports and live awards shows to watch. But again, live awards shows could also get back better if there wasn't a particular narrative that was one-sided. Without saying it's political, but there's a one-sided narrative that doesn't resonate with everybody. When there used to be a thing where you tried to satisfy everyone, there was like a natural voice across the board where people could relate. But there's a lot of things being put now in network TV that's not relatable. You know, watching people on major big desks trying to talk to each other and putting the microphones out there, like just trying to showcase the programming in a way that doesn't feel normal or customary. Like people want to get back to normal. So by showing abnormal views makes you think of bad times. It makes you think of the lockdown. We don't want to think about lockdown. We want to be getting away from that. But again, network TV wants to continue to keep you thinking about that because that's what they feel like. That's what they're being told to do. Let's just say it like it is. And meanwhile, one story that did help out, which I'm going to bring up now, is the fact that Hollywood is making a comeback. Now, because of what's going on, here's the thing. Network TV might not know what's going on, but you know what Hollywood knows what's going on because they're concerned. They are panicking. They need to get back on board. They need to get started. So things finally happen. We know we talked about a few weeks ago where the Hollywood labor unions were trying to get an agreement put together to get people back to work. They already had a deal put in place as to how to get, everything with social distancing, with proper hygiene, keeping everyone quarantined on the set so that everybody can go and do their projects and go along and move forward and get some programming put together. And the can, if you will. Well, earlier this week, we got some of that. After months of negotiations, Hollywood unions and management came to an agreement to return to work safely in the coronavirus area. Well, I'm going to take this from local TV, KABC in Los Angeles. Production guilds, unions, and studios were finally come to agreement about how to get everyone back to work. So collaborations were difficult, weren't easy, but there's a mutual respect on both sides, safety and healthy. So new measures that must be implemented will be strict and regular COVID testing, safety protocols, PPE and physical distancing. Workers, including the many freelancers, will get COVID-19 sick leave and quarantine pay. On-camera talent may also be working with fewer people on set. Now, Duncan Crabtree Ireland, SAG-AFTRA COO and General Counsel, says that, quote, performers are the only people in our entire country who are going to be returning to work without always wearing a mask and without always being able to maintain that physical distance. The testing has became so crucial to that. The agreement right now details how to manage every possible scenario, including intimate scenes. Cheating with camera angles and daily COVID-19 testing are just some of the ways to protect the artists. So that's where the KBC story finishes up. Let's go into the story from Deadline. It gives much more. So again, Hollywood unions and management and AMPTP finally have an agreement to return. So studios, networks, major companies, independent producers alike are cleared to resume production. They're going to adopt the protocols we talked about called the Safe Way Forward, which was instituted on June 12th. And the industry-wide Labor Management Safety Committee Task Force has issued return-to-work protocols as of June 1st. So it's just a matter of getting everybody on board. Now, here's some of the deals, part of the deal highlights. Again, quarantine pay. Employees who are required to quarantine or isolate at the request of an employer will receive quarantine pay. All employees will receive 10 days of COVID-19 paid sick leave per producer, and the leave can be used for any of the eligible COVID-19 events. Employees who go on sick leave will be reinstated once they have been cleared to return to work, so as long as their position continues to exist. They'll have comprehensive mandatory testing regimens, testing frequency, and the zone system, which will lay out barriers within which those on set can flow based on proximity to the cast, level of testing, PPE, and the extent to which physical distancing can be observed in the performance of their work. Then there is safety monitoring and enforcement. So everybody's on board with it, and a lot of different quotes being talked about this. So that was great news. That everybody's going to get back to work. A lot of people are going to get back to work. And not so much the artists, but the people behind the scenes. All the grips, the gaffers, the producers, the writers, directors. Everybody behind that set. Catering, they're all coming back. That's great news. So we're going to finally get some production back on board. So we'll get some new programming, and I'm looking forward to seeing what all comes back. More importantly, that we know we'll have movies and we'll have TV shows being produced now that are going to probably have a quick turnaround to get back on the television or onto movies pretty quickly, because there's going to be a vacuum. There's going to be a void that needs to be filled. And hopefully, all these different organizations will be ready to get all this put together. So we're not going to be having a lot of stuff sitting on the can waiting to be put out and released. They're going to have stuff ready to go. So that's very good news. That's promising right there. And here's the reason that really makes it more importantly why we need to worry about this is because the movie industry is still on hold. Now, in my local area, the Regal Theater here, because they're not making any money on later movies, they're cutting the amount of movies they're running every day. They're closing up earlier. So like last movie's in at like 10 o'clock. So like if I want to catch a late show, the last ones were 8 o'clock as opposed to 9 o'clock or 9:30 or 10 o'clock. I used to remember going to midnight movies. I used to love those. So I used to go to 2 movies in a weekend. But now I don't have that. So they're making it where you can't go at night, more or less. It's getting a bit tougher. And then the movie industry has not brought out any new movies because the fact that Tenet was able to pull the money that they could to get some real money out there, to get some real people to go ahead and say, okay, let's bring the movies back. The movie studios do not want to bank on putting a movie out that's not going to make its money back right away. They are still under the thought process of saying, okay, well, we want to get the kind of money we were getting before. Okay. Well, we're seeing some stories that are out here that weekend predictions, movies are showing better legs during the pandemic. This is from. So Disney recently announced that they're moving their upcoming Marvel Cinematic Universe releases into 2021. So Black Widow is moving out of 2020. It's going to take over Shang-Chi's previous slot on May 7th. And now the October release schedule is looking very thin. November is not looking much better, and there's a high probability that at least one of the movies that are coming up might get slipped from their current planned release dates. No Time to Die, Soul, and The Croods: A New Age. This weekend technically has 4 films opening wide release. The re-release of Empire Strikes Back, Shortcut, an Italian horror movie from Gravitas Ventures, opening around 600 locations. And 2 movies honoring Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the basis of sex and RBG. But there is some good news. Films currently playing in theaters are showing better week-to-week lags than the case was before the pandemic. So that means that the movies, there's not a major fall off in the people actually watching movies. So the fact that we only have so many movies available, that the movies are not dropping off in revenue as fast as they normally would. Usually would just be like a roller coaster, just drop quickly. It's like a depreciation of a car. So in the same vein, the car is not getting depreciated. The value of the movie is not going away, which means we're back to the old days where you have movies that can stay out for longer because people are just not, going to the movies right away, catching a movie, and then they got to catch it right then and there. No. So Tenet, for that example, could stay out for as long as it wants, and it will continue to make money. That's the point they're making here. And if I look at the graphics, you'll see in the link, if you go look at broadcasterspodcast.com, or you look at the show, in the show description, you'll see the link for this particular, some of the graphics that they put in here. That you can just see that based on 6 wide releases to date, August 21st to September 18th, weekend box office for opening weekend, the pandemic box office, movies after the 4th weekend will continue to lag out and still stay about 30% active. Like, you'll still have people staying around to go catch the movies 4 weeks after release. Meanwhile, that same amount of drop-off will take half the time. Theater count versus opening weekend, well, again, we're seeing an increase of the people going to theaters and how many theaters are available. And then there's not a lot of theaters that are dropping off because they have new movies to drop in. Where, if an older movie is staying around for a couple of weeks, then it's going to get less showings and less screens. The point is that Tenet would still have the same amount of screens because there's nothing else to opening. So they can continue to put movies out there. Unhinged can try to make as much money as it can. Bill and Ted Face the Music can make as much money as it can. The New Mutants can try to make as much money as it can. Regardless of how good the movies are, at least they're going to have a chance to be out there, and there's going to be something for people to go watch. People are going to want to go watch movies just to go watch movies. That's where they're coming from with this. In their predictions this week, they say that it's going to probably be a total, in the top 5 movies they have coming up, we'll probably see this weekend about 8.4 million total of the top 5 movies coming out. Last weekend, they got 9.8 million altogether. So, of the movies they had brought out last week, Tenet, let me just go into the actual box office list. I'll give you the release numbers just to go and go to the actual moment. So, the weekend chart, 3 weeks for Tenet, 4.7 million this past week. Still the same amount of movies, by the way. It's 2,930 screens. And they've added 20 screens since. And they're coming in their 4th week. It's already grossed right now $36.1 million. And as for their international total, $213 million overseas. And the movie was made for $240 million. It's broken this budget. It made it. Regardless of what people want to say, the movie, $224 million was the production budget. It broke it. It's gonna turn a profit. It's got to, and definitely we're gonna look at DVD sales. We're gonna see what SVOD does as well. It's gonna make its money. Will it make more than it should have? Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, at this point, I don't know if it's gonna make $300 million after its run. It could, which in the pandemic is not horrible. I mean, could the movie have done 400, 500 million? Probably. But again, you're sitting here, you had this movie all ready to go. What else are you going to do? You wanted to get out there, you get it noticed, and it was pushed out. I mean, it's still something to be said where, it's still the number 1 movie right now in the box office. And yeah, it sucks that it's kind of stuck in this spot, but what are you going to do? There's no other movies that are coming out. And the thing is, You either do it now, because if you would have waited to put Tenet out next year, you don't already know that the release schedule for next year is going to be sick. Because we know a lot of movies next year will be pushed out, and it will be so crammed to put yourself in a spot to see anything. Like if I even look at what's going on in January, January will have wide releases, and I'm already looking right now. There are wide releases, multiple, every week going into January, 2 to 3 a week. And you're telling me Tenet's going to come in here and just kind of take a spot? Because anyway, they were putting this movie out for the summer initially. And it's going to be tough to do that next year. I mean, put it like this. For next year, for 2021, right around the summertime, we have we knew the new Fast and Furious got pushed back. Okay? You're going to have A Quiet Place Part 2 coming out. You got Black Widow, which will be next year. You got Godzilla vs. Kong next year. I mean, a new Conjuring. Jurassic World Dominion, excuse me. There is a new Venom. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's going to be so hard for Tenet to come in and get into this very jam-packed thing. A new Space Jam, a new Purge, a new Top Gun. Okay, you got a new Suicide Squad, Deep Water. You got a new Blumhouse movie. I mean, it's just impossible. There's so much going on next year. What are they going to do? Wait till next year, the year after, to put this out? They're not. They have to take the spot that they're in. This is where they're just stuck because they have no choice. They have to stay with where they're at. They have no choice. And again, the movie theaters will struggle, as I talked about last week, because there's just not that many movies out there. There's only one wide release across the board for each week in October. War with Grandpa is a Robert De Niro based movie, like a kid's movie. Honest Thief, Empty Man, and Fatale. These are the 4 movies they have for October, because everything else is limited. That's all they got. And now here's the thing. Maybe there's going to be some independent movies that would be Oscar nominated, or would have been in that Oscar run, that might make it into the theaters now, that would have normally have gotten to the mainstream theaters because of what they did. Because, what we're seeing right now is we're seeing movies coming back to be replayed. So Empire Strikes Back, that's going to get some people to come back and watch on a nice big screen. That will get some, nostalgia to come back. But again, that's just not enough. And there's just so much more. So for Tenet to do what they did was a good spot. New Mutants, $17 million. And worldwide, $31 million. But again, that movie wasn't going to do that well, it sounds like, because it was kind of hurting anyway. It was just a rough movie that got put out, where it comes down to. And that's not good for 20th century. Again, it is the X-Men franchise, but it's not that MCU Disney kind of thing. It just doesn't have like the right push for what it is. So they struggled, as we can see. And production budget was $67 million, so it wasn't like they put a major amount into it. Infidel, that was a small budget movie. That was 3rd place. And then Unhinged, which was the one that was from a smaller studio, independent studio, had Russell Crowe in the starring role. $15.6 million they've made it total. And $1.2 million they made this weekend. But again, that's one of the first movies that came back. $25 million box office total so far. And as for production budget, was $33 million. Still got a chance to make it over. But again, it wasn't going to do that big of a thing. Probably will do better SVOD. Because it's one of those movies that when I saw it, it looked like one of those January, February type movies that just wasn't going to make that much of a difference. A Bill and Ted Face the Music, that also came out. It's not making as much money, but it's also not that many in theaters. But overall, that movie made $4 million. That movie didn't have a production budget of $25 million. I think it's still going to make its money. Some of these movies they put out, so it might still have a chance to make their money back. It might make some of their money back on the SVOD, because they could just do that. There's a lot of that going on, but who knows what's going to be done. So like we said, Black Widow's been pushed to 2021. And shares for all the movie theaters got hurt. Wonder Woman 1984 also moved away. And we don't know about where late November is going to come out, Thanksgiving weekend, if No Time to Die and Disney's Pixar film Soul are going to stay around on the schedule. Jeff Bach, senior analyst at Exhibitor Relations, said, tent poles drive the box office, always have. So while there's an opportunity for smaller distributors to get in on the big screen action, it's doubtful theaters can survive on small genre-driven films alone. So that's where we're at with that. Now, as for Marvel movies, there's a lot of things that are being changed with that as well. But again, it's all getting pushed back. 2021 is going to be very busy. So there's not much going to be done right now. Okay, I want to move into another story about the overall dynamic of the digital disruption. Social media. An MIT professor actually has written about this. We're going to talk about that real quick. From MIT News. Why social media has changed the world and how to fix it. So MIT professor Sinan Aral's new book, The Hype Machine, explores the perils and problems of social media in a time of discord. And he suggests new ways to prevent online information from exacerbating falsehood, polarization, and social tension. So I'm going to probably see if I can try to reach this professor and get him on the air. Maybe we'll go ahead and talk about the book. I'd like to go and talk about this. It sounds very interesting. So in the story, he explains that humans are highly social creatures. Our brains have become wired to process social information. We usually feel better when we are connected. Social media taps into this tendency. Now, the professor says human brains, quote, have essentially evolved because of sociality more than any other thing. When you develop a population-scale technology that delivers social signals to the tune of trillions per day in real time, the rise of social media isn't unexpected. It's like tossing a lit match into a pool of gasoline. 2005, 7% of American adults used social media. By 2017, make that 80% of American adults used Facebook alone. Now, 3.5 billion out of 7.7 billion are active social media participants. Globally, people will post 500 million tweets, share over 10 billion pieces of Facebook content, and watch over 1 billion hours of YouTube videos. A typical day. That's where all the eyeballs are. Those are the eyeballs that used to be on mainstream media and entertainment. But then mainstream media and entertainment needed to move themselves over to digital. But they're only giving a sample of what they have, not their entire offering. Unless they can put it to you at a premium. Because if they can't get you with advertising in their traditional models, they'll then put a subscription price on you instead. He also says that social media disrupts our elections, our economy, and our health. He says as social media platforms have grown, the once prevalent gauzy utopian vision of online community has disappeared. Along with the benefits of easy connectivity and increased information, social media has also become a vehicle for disinformation and political attacks from beyond sovereign borders. He details, again, why it's become successful yet so problematic, suggesting ways to improve them. This machine exists in every facet of our lives, he says. And the question in the book is, what do we do? How do we achieve the promise of this machine and avoid this peril? We're at a crossroads. What we do next is essential. So I want to equip people, policymakers, and platforms to help achieve the good outcomes and avoid the bad outcomes. Researchers at UCLA have found that people obtain bigger hits of dopamine when their social media posts receive more likes. Then there was a study in 2018 by Sarush Vashugi, an MIT PhD student, now this is a professor of computer science at Dartmouth. They've been studying social networking for 20 years. Him and also Professor Aral, or Dr. Aral, and Deb Roy, MIT professor of media arts and sciences and executive director of the MIT Media Lab. So From 2006 to 2017, they said on Twitter, false news stories were 70% more likely to be retweeted than true ones. Why? Most likely because false news has greater novelty value compared to the truth and provokes stronger reactions, especially disgust and surprise, which is why the kind of stories we're seeing in the mainstream media, when it's not objective, when it's fit to carve into a particular narrative, that's what they want. Shock, awe, fear, anger. They want you to emote. They want you to exert an emotion. That's the purpose of what the news is right now. It's not to actually deliver the news objectively with an objective viewpoint, with everything being taken into account. It's not being happening right now. In this slide, the essential tension surrounding social media companies is that their platforms gain audiences and revenue when posts provoke strong emotional responses, often based on dubious content. There's more to the story, but I'm going to leave it there. So as we said, social media is making a significant difference. And it's not so much where social media, where it is YouTube or just video, where you're going to engage and watch videos and do other things. Because social media isn't so much just a connection of a different post, it's all content. And quite a times there's content that people will watch and they'll engage more with than they'll watch traditional television, which is scripted and put together, and they have actual stars. And remember, there was a time where people really felt something about watching their favorite celebrities on TV. But the celebrities we have now, they're being exposed for how much talent they really have. When they don't have those producers or those makeup artists or the people around them or the environment to work from. Because if you're just having a celebrity going on through a Zoom call, doing interviews and trying to do more than that, it's just not working anymore. We're starting to get the exposure of all these celebrities for who they are. That they shouldn't have been allowed. They should have been kept radio silent from being on Zoom calls and being noticed as everyday people. Because then the luster of them being a celebrity goes away. And the specialness of watching them on television or in our movies goes away as well. Because then we start seeing the side of them that isn't good. Because then we're seeing they're just not everyday people. That they're privileged. They feel like, they're better than everybody else in some cases. That's not good. I want to go through some things right now when it comes to radio listener profiles. One of the interesting things they talked about when it comes to this study from Edison Research is radio continues to have a hardware challenge, particularly with younger leading formats. 11 formats were indexed against the market average for owning a traditional radio receiver in their home. Formats whose primary listeners, or P1s, are more likely to own a home radio include classic hits, classic rock, country, hard rock and heavy metal, news talk, and sports. Formats less likely to own a home radio include alternative, rock, contemporary Christian, and the two formats that index the lowest for home radio ownership, hip-hop and rap, and top 40. R&B is exactly the market average for owning a radio in the household. Smart speakers provide a partial solution. As technology has provided more devices for listening, smart speaker ownership is consistently growing, and radio formats with younger listeners are more likely to own a smart speaker. Online listening remains elusive for AM/FM radio. 75% of radio listeners that if they listen to sports, top 40, alternative rock, hard rock, heavy metal, hip-hop, and rap, which are mostly younger formats, they at least listen to any online radio services or audio services in the last week, as opposed to listening to AM and FM radio, just turning it on in their car. The percentages drop significantly for other formats that are not new music. Music discovery is moving to YouTube and other places. YouTube is a source of music discovery defying age and radio format boundaries, and one of the top 3 sources for new music discovery by all the music formats profiled. AM/FM radio was one of the top 3 sources for new music discovery, except for the exception of hip hop and rap. But there's only new music that's being curated because whatever kind of deals that the radio companies have with the artists. So here's the thing. If it's an artist that is a bona fide hit maker, so if Taylor Swift puts out a new album, you're absolutely going to start hearing the songs right away. If Harry Styles or One Direction or any of these other artists or Katy Perry comes out with a new album, they're obviously going to always put those songs up first. Justin Bieber, Ariana Grande, if they put out new music, Lady Gaga, absolutely get a bump on radio immediately. But as we've talked about before, it takes about 8 to 12 weeks for new music that's come from streaming that's already viral or coming from YouTube or TikTok. Takes up to 3 months for a song to finally make it over. And we talk about that all the time as well. Because if you look at the Billboard Hot 100, and I've done this comparison many times before, and look at Media Base and how far behind they are when it comes to songs. They're so far behind. The Hot 100 right now, your top 10 songs, 10 is What's Poppin', Jack Harlow. Before You Go, Lewis Capaldi's 9, 8, Savage Love, 7, Watermelon Sugar, Mood is 6, Blinding Lights 5, Rockstar 4, Laugh Not Cry Later 3, Dynamite 2, WAP 1, or WAP. But if you look on the media-based charts, your main radio charts, just your top 40, the mainstream, because top 40 is not supposed to be a pop chart. It should be a mainstream chart. But your top 10 songs, Surf Mesa and ILY, which is, if it's even on the chart, it's not. I don't even think it's on the chart at all. It's been off the chart for a while, as a matter of fact. Yes, it's not even on the chart. Harry Styles, Watermelon Sugar. Let me going 10 to 9. Gabby Barrett and Charlie Puth. I Hope that song is actually number 11 this week. So it's 7 here. Okay, Harry Styles, Adore You. That's off the main chart. It's still in the top 100, but it's not as high as it was. Oh, ILY is 49. Okay. Adore You's 18. But it's already had its run. It's 41 weeks on the chart. But yet the song's here. And it's still right. It's still making runs. It's just starting to make its way down now. But again, that was a song that was on for almost a year so far. Dua Lipa, Break My Heart. That song still is somewhat up in the top. So it's number 20. But it's been 25 weeks on the chart. And the song is still growing now, which is ridiculous. Weekend Blinding Lights, which just has been a perennial song. It's just been up there for a long time. But the song has also had a lot of run, staying in the top 10 for about like 30 plus weeks? 42 weeks on, currently number 5. Song just has staying power. And radio continues to hold on to it. And radio continues to have it right there at number 4. Rockstar, Weekend Blinding Lights is 5. This chart is so weird. From hitsdailylabel.com. Rockstar's 4, Savage Love 3, which is about right. Savage Love is 8. Rockstar's 4. So it is kind of staying in the spot. That's not horrible. Watermelon Sugar is 2, which is 7 right now on the Billboard Hot 100. And then Lewis Capaldi, Before You Go, that song is currently 9. But radio does read a lot into those charts. But then what about the songs that should be up there that are viral right now, that are already on the chart and making a big difference? Because again, these songs have a lot of staying power and they've been solid. But the radio runs have promoted these songs to stay longer. Because radio's secondary when it comes to everything else. Meanwhile, songs that are up here that could have been done, Laugh Not Cry Later, is it even here? No. Oh, actually, there it is, 26. Halfway down the chart in the media-based chart, which is the one that most of the major top 40 radio stations follow by. At least the iHeart radio stations all follow this chart, of which they encompass most of the top 40 stations, with Entercom and CBS holding on to the minority of those stations that are top 40. And by the way, top 40 across the board, their ratings are horrible. There are no stations that are in the top 5. The 2 major markets, New York, LA, Chicago, they are definitely like under top 5. right now. They're just not performing well. Mood, 24K Gold, and Ian Dior, which is just a hot song right now. And it's starting to make its way up. Again, it's up at number 6, and it's holding its spot because all these other songs, because of radio, is being held back. Meanwhile, is Mood even in the top 50? I don't think so. It's 14. And it's just starting to make its way up now. So, I mean, one of the things that's being done right now is that radio is trying to start pick itself back up because it does need to do that. But again, it's still holding back a lot. You can just notice that. But that's because Billboard kind of allows that so much because, again, it's just songs that will stay around. That's why they can go and stay around for 30, 40, 50 weeks because radio is holding on to them. And radio's getting them after they've already been long-standing hits that people have been listening to for months. So that lasting power, they just can continue to go on and do the normal routine of having a song on, popular, and in heavy rotation for 20, 30 weeks, well after it's been out there. But they don't care. They don't think about that. They're worried about trying to find ways to get people to listen to them when they're not listening on the AM/FM dial. They're having the same problem as television is, network television. And radio doesn't necessarily have the on-demand kind of thing because that's what Spotify and Pandora and Amazon and Apple Music do. That's how they got it set. They don't have that figured out yet. And way too many commercials, as always, they don't figure that out either. And they're probably not going to figure that out. They don't know what they're doing. A couple more stories I want to bring up before we can wrap things up. Uproxx put up an interesting story. Again, even the music industry is also affected by digital disruption, and this COVID has not helped out. The pandemic struggles. There's a survey that's come out that says that it looks like a third of musicians may leave the industry altogether. The Musicians Union, via NME magazine in the UK, there was a new study that says that 34% of musicians are considering leaving the music industry because of pandemic-caused losses. And nearly half of the Musicians Union members have been forced to seek alternative work. 70% of them are currently doing less than a quarter of their regular work. And Musicians Union General Secretary Horace Trubridge, he asked for the UK government to support musicians, noting that the figures are devastating and show how many musicians are struggling financially and at real risk of leaving music for good. In better times, our members drive a €5 billion music industry or pound industry with their talent. One artist gig will create a domino effect of jobs from lighting technicians to ticket sellers. If one musician's out of work, you can be sure many others will be affected too. Sad to see that, but it's very true. And one other thing I'm going to bring up here, I usually bring this up on my When I'm Not Podcasting series, is the issues with Spotify and Joe Rogan. And I've talked about that extensively in my When I'm Not Podcasting series, so please go and subscribe to that and check it out for yourselves and see for yourself. So Joe Rogan, Vulture.com reports it's already a headache for Spotify. And this is a mess, but again, I still appreciate and support Joe Rogan and his effort to go and take money from Spotify, because if it's there, he'll take it. As long as he stays true to his guns and continues to put out the kind of content he wants, and he doesn't cave in. So this move prompted immediate questions about whether Spotify was prepared for what the media phenomenon would bring with it. Joe Rogan commands an exceptionally large following and a growing currency of cultural influence, but Rogan's radical free speech orientation and free-thinking ideology have consistently courted controversy in the past. Observers were curious to see how Spotify would navigate around the issues of misinformation and hate speech, the latter being a concept that Rogan himself has had a history of actively interrogating its terms in relationship with free speech. So they talk about the episode that he most recently had with Douglas Murray. We're not going to go into all that. There was a report from Motherboard and Vice.com that said that there was an emerging tension between Spotify's workforce and its leadership over content substance, citing 3 anonymized sources. Of course, they would not speak out in public. There was a recent company town hall meeting in which some employees raised concerns and submitted questions over Rogan's history with comments deemed transphobic. The CEO acknowledged a total of 10 meetings have been held with various groups and individuals to hear their respective concerns. He additionally commented on guest spots on Joe Rogan that they were checking episodes in question and they've been reviewed extensively. The fact we aren't changing our position doesn't mean we aren't listening. It just means we made a different judgment call. So there are specific things that this writer for Vulture wants to keep an eye on, he says. First is whether Spotify will more clearly design a set of policies about speech on this platform, whether the platform will stick closely to it, and whether those policies will sit well with Rogan. The second thing is the growing labor movement within Spotify. The three content divisions within Spotify is Gimlet Media, The Ringer, and Paracast, which are actively organizing in pursuit of building worker power within the institution. There's a pathway for that organizing purview to overlap with editorial and speech issues like this. Well, listen, for whatever Joe Rogan does for his program, I don't think he's going to change his show at all, and I hope he doesn't. And if they want to go and move him off, fine. It's not going to make a difference for him at all to take himself off of there. He was making money off of YouTube just fine, but there was also issues with free speech where there might have been some censorship issues, and he was worried about that. So he took the shot to go to Spotify, took the money. Why not? If it didn't mean he had to change, he didn't have to sacrifice who he is, sacrifice his content for the sake of the dollar, then yeah, this was a smart move. But more importantly is that if he loses the deal afterwards, it doesn't matter. He's making money anyway. And he can keep doing the show as he did with or without Spotify. What's more important here is that in this digital disruption, while the more corporatized ideas of labor unions and regulation of content, regardless if you like it or not, there's always going to be other platforms for people to go to, okay? And someone with the kind of draw of Joe Rogan, he can go to a new platform. I mean, he could go to Vimeo or Twitch or DLive or BitChute or wherever he wants. He could go to a new platform and make an audience come to that, and then others will follow him, okay? People are following him to Spotify, and that's what Daniel Ek wanted, which is smart. So what do you expect? I think Joe Rogan's still doing the right idea. He's an example of somebody that is bucking the system. He's mainstream, and he's still doing it his way. And that's the main focus I want everybody to know out there, is to be able to still do it your way, to not be discouraged, to know that it's your performance is your merit. That's really what it's going to make who you are, and to not take the cultural, social, societal norms that are being put in front of you. That people think that that's what content creators need to be. You have to be able to check the boxes. No, I don't believe in that. This is why we have, when a pandemic and labor unions and all the problems that corporatization, PC culture, social culture create, that foster an environment which makes things harder to create great content, creativity gets crushed. And then with the constant issues they already have right now and the lack of good content by a lot of these corporatized sources, well, we see how Netflix and others are doing. We see how Apple and Spotify are doing, right? The COVID crisis brought upon all these different media. They have to find a way to recover. But the digital disruption leaves the room for creativity to thrive, because creativity continues online with shows like this, supporting that movement. And I continue to support the movement with all of you out there, content creators, and those that might want to be in content creation yourself. That's what I hope you'll appreciate, that what this show does. I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to come back next week with another episode. And until next week, I hope you'll go ahead and subscribe. If you want, you can also listen to the show on YouTube and watch it there. I also put it up there regularly, along with all my other programming. YouTube.com/JBRASCO951. It's all right there. Till next week, remember, content is king, and to control your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast, presented by BroadcastersPodcast.com and KingofPodcasts.com. The Broadcasters Podcast is brought to you by kingofpodcasts.com/Amazon. If Amazon is good enough for the King of Podcasts, it most certainly is good for you. kingofpodcasts.com/Amazon. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program. The Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at kingofpodcasts.com.